Behind the scenes, Richard Harrison was living a nightmare. Now his wife is suing their own son over $500,000 in missing cash, and the dark truth is coming out. Did Rick Harrison really cheat on his mother while she was in a coma? Did the old man know about the betrayal before he died? The truth about TV's favorite pawnshop family will leave you speechless. Richard Benjamin Harrison Jr. was born on March 4, 1941 in Danville, Virginia. He is best known as the Old Man from Pawn Stars. Richard's family moved to Lexington, North Carolina when he was 1 year old. They lived in a small house at 115 Peacock Avenue, which reflected their working-class life. His father was a welder and carpenter, struggling to provide for the family. Money was always tight, and Richard learned early on that hard work was the only way to get by. When he was 14, he got a job that most teens wouldn't even think of. He became a school bus driver, getting up early every morning to pick up kids and take them to school. Parked the bus at his house overnight and made about $5 or $6 a week. It wasn't much, but it helped his family a lot. School wasn't his top priority. He went to Lexington High School but dropped out in his junior year because his family was having money problems. Making a living was more important than finishing school. When he was 17, his life took a sudden turn when he met Joanne Rue at a barn dance. It was a moment that would change the rest of his life. At the same time, he made a mistake that could have destroyed his relationship with her. After stealing a car and getting caught, he was given two options: go to jail or join the military. It was an easy choice for him, so in October 1958, he joined the U.S. Navy, which would change his life. His plan was to serve for 4 years, but things didn't go as planned, and 2 years into his service, he married Joanne, and soon after they had their first child, Sherry. When she was born, she had Down syndrome and needed expensive medical care to make sure she could get the care she needed. Re-enlisted, which added 20 years to his time in the Navy. He served on 4 different ships, rising through the ranks until he was a petty officer first class. His assignments took him all over the Pacific, where he worked on destroyers like the USS Orla and the USS Twining. Later, he joined the Tactical Air Control Squadron 21, where he was in charge of air operations. His longest trip was from 1971 to 1975 on the USS Chuano, where he was in charge of multiple deployments to Vietnam and received several awards, including the Good Conduct Medal and the Vietnam Service Medal, but the Navy kept him away from home for long stretches of time. He missed out on important events for almost half of his career. In 1979, he decided to retire from the military after 20 years of service. He had 3 teenage sons at home at the time. Richard Harrison and his wife Joanna moved to San Diego to start a new life and hope for the best. They started a real estate business and worked hard, even opening their own office for a while. Things looked good until the early 1000s, 980s, when the economy crashed. When the housing market crashed, mortgage interest rates shot up to 18%, ruining the Harrisons' investments in real estate. They thought they were investing in their future, but instead they lost almost $1 million. Losing everything could have broken them, but Harrison refused to give up. Later in life, he said that his time in the Navy taught him to be resilient and work hard. He knew they had to start over, even if that meant leaving San Diego in April 1981 with only a few things. With only $5,000 left, Harrison and his family packed up and moved to Las Vegas. It wasn't a hopeful move, it was a desperate gamble. Las Vegas wasn't yet the booming city it would become, but Harrison saw potential and thought they could start over. As soon as they got there, he and his son Rick opened a small used store on Las Vegas Boulevard South called the Gold and Silver Coin Shop. It was only 300 square feet, which was barely big enough to run a business. They did everything they could to get customers, but things didn't take off right away. To keep the family financially stable, Rick worked nights taking back cars and ran the shop during the day. The business struggled at first, but the Harrisons refused to give up. Over time, they built a reputation for honesty and skill. By 1986, they had outgrown their small store and moved to a bigger one. But Harrison and Rick still had bigger plans for the future. Pawn licenses in Las Vegas were hard to get because the city had strict rules about how many could be given out, but Rick paid close attention and tracked down. He kept calling city officials, knowing that if the city grew, more licenses would eventually become available. Eventually, his patience paid off. In 1989, after years of persistence, they finally got one of Las Vegas's highly sought-after pawn licenses. The next year, they opened Gold and Silver Pawn Shop at 713 Las Vegas Boulevard South, just 2 miles from the Strip. It was the right place at the right time. By 2015, the shop was lending around $3 million a year and making $700,000 in interest income. Business was booming. There were a lot of pawn shops in Las Vegas, so the competition was tough. Many people thought the business was shady and full of companies that took advantage of customers. The Harrisons knew they had to earn people's trust. Rick had spent years studying history and antiques. His knowledge gave the shop an edge. He could spot valuable items that others missed. Instead of focusing on gold jewelry and electronics like most pawn shops do, they became known for dealing with rare collectibles and historical artifacts. The Harrison treated customers fairly, which helped them build loyalty. By the early 2000s, the shop was famous in Las Vegas. Gamblers who lost money at casinos would often pawn valuables to get home. Collectors came in looking for rare finds, and some just wanted to see what treasures were inside. Over the years, the shop's inventory became even more unique. They bought and sold Roman coins, samurai swords, and even a New England Patriots Super Bowl ring. In 2010, the shop, which was owned by cornerback Brock Williams, became a must-see for tourists and collectors alike. The demand was so high that they had to keep growing. By October of that year, the showroom had reached over 1,500 square feet. In 2003, something unexpected happened at the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas. A late-night show called Insomniac with Dave Attell featured the shop in one of its episodes. For most people, it was just a short segment about an odd business, but for Rick Harrison had been trying for years to get TV networks to agree that a reality show about his pawn shop could work. He knew that people would be interested in the rare items that came in and the deals that happened every day, but network executives didn't see it that way. One even told him that no one would watch four fat guys in a pawn shop. His appearance on Insomniac, however, caught the attention of TV producers who saw the potential for a show. They realized that this wasn't just Harrison. It took a few more years for everything to come together, but by 2008, the idea for the show had formed. It would be about history, deals, and family dynamics in a pawn shop. At first, it was called Pawning History, and the History Channel was interested but thought the name wasn't right. Rick, his father Richard, the old man Harrison, his son Corey, and their longtime friend Chumley were a fun mix of tension and a lot of knowledge about rare collectibles. It wasn't quite right, so they changed the name to Pawn Stars, a play on words that was catchy enough to get people's attention. The show premiered on July 19, 2009, and in just 10 weeks, it became the highest-rated show on the History Channel. Only Jersey Shore had higher ratings in the country. As Pawn Stars became more popular, the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop changed forever. Before the show, about 70 people a day came to see the shop and meet the cast. By October 2010, that number had skyrocketed to over 1,000 people from all over the world came to see the shop and meet the cast. The show went global, airing in more than 150 countries and being translated into 38 languages. One of the most recognizable faces on the show was Richard Harrison, also known as the Old Man. He was born on March 4, 1941 in Danville, Virginia, and became a pawnbroker after serving in the Navy for more than 20 years. In 1989, he and Rick opened the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas. Even before the show, Richard was known for being direct, which is how he got the nickname the Old Man. Because he was so serious on screen, he became a fan favorite. He was tough and always ready to call out bad deals. He often got into arguments with Corey and Chumley over their choices, but that only made the show funnier. Under his grumpy exterior, there was a man who cared deeply about the business and the people in it. Richard also had a deep love for classic cars. Over the years, he showed off many of them on the show, but one stood out. His family gave him a 1,966 Imperial Crown for his 50th wedding anniversary. As a man who rarely showed emotion, this was one of the few times that it moved Richard Harrison to tears. Richard Harrison was more than just a TV personality. He was a husband, father, grandfather, and the head of a family that stuck together through all of life's challenges. In 1960, Richard married Joanne Rue, who would be by his side for almost 60 years. Joanne came from a well-connected family. Her father was a county judge and later became a ruler. Even though she came from a wealthy family, Richard and Joanne's life together wasn't always easy. They had problems that put them to the test in ways that not many couples do. Their first child, a daughter named Sherry, was born with Down syndrome. Raising a child with special needs was hard, but they loved her very much. When she died at age 6, it left a hole in their hearts that could never be fully filled. Richard and Joanne went on to have 3 more children. Rick, Joseph Life, kept throwing problems at Kent and Christopher Keith. At one point, money problems made them have to make tough choices. Richard had been in the Navy for over 20 years, which was a stable job, but after he left, things were less stable. Joanne got her real estate license in the hopes that it would help keep the family afloat. Richard did any job he could find. Money was tight, but they never gave up. In the late 1980s, Richard and his oldest son Rick decided to take a chance and opened it was just a small family-run business when Richard opened the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas in 1989. It wasn't fancy, but it was built on his strict principles of fairness and hard work. He had a good business sense and believed in doing things the right way, which meant no shortcuts, handouts, or room for laziness. He ran the shop with the same discipline he had learned in the Navy, and it paid off. Richard had always been a tough man, even before he was known as the Old Man. People started calling him no nonsense when he was only 38 years old because of his rough personality and old-fashioned way of thinking. He didn't believe in sugarcoating things. He expected people to work hard, be responsible, and take care of their own problems. This way of thinking followed him to the pawn shop, where he quickly became known for his sharp bargaining skills. Anyone trying to pull a fast one knew they were up against a man who had seen it all. Those friends and family of Richard Stern knew there was another side to him. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a father and grandfather who cared deeply about his family. His relationship with Rick was especially strong. They built the business together every day. When Pawn Stars started in 2009, their relationship became the heart of the show. Viewers saw their playful banter, occasional fights, and undeniable respect for each other. But Richard was also a mentor to those who saw him on TV. Richard also had a deep love for classic cars. He had his eye on a 1966 Imperial Crown for 15 years, patiently waiting for the owner to sell it. When the deal finally went through, it wasn't just another business deal. Years later, for their 50th wedding anniversary, Rick and his son Corey had the car fully restored as a surprise gift. It was one of the few times Richard was speechless, surprising for a man who rarely showed emotion. The Harrison family went through another tragedy when Richard's middle son, Joseph Kent, died. Losing one child was hard enough. Losing another was something no parent should ever have to go through. But Richard was strong as always. He didn't let his grief break him. Instead, he focused on the family he still had and made sure they stayed together no matter what. But behind the scenes, things were getting harder for him. Harrison was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a neurological disorder that affects movement, balance, and even speech. At first, he didn't tell anyone about his illness because he didn't want sympathy or special treatment. He kept doing what he always did, which was running the pawn shop and keeping his family in line. But Parkinson's is relentless, and over time, it got harder for him to hide how the disease was affecting him. His movements slowed down, his hands shook, and simple tasks became too much for him to handle. His once booming voice became weak. He pushed through the disease for as long as he could, refusing to let it define him. By 2017, Harrison's health had gotten so bad that he had to quit Pawn Stars. A stroke made things even worse, and he decided it was time to retire. It wasn't easy, because he had spent almost 30 years at the shop and the show had given him fame he never expected, but his body just wouldn't let him keep up with the demanding schedule followers noticed. Many people wondered about his health while he was away, but not many knew how badly he was struggling. Even while he was fighting Parkinson's, he stayed involved in the business, giving Rick and Corey advice and making sure the shop ran the way he wanted it to. On June 25, 208, Richard Harrison died at the age of 77. He was surrounded by his family during his last moments. Rick Harrison broke the sad news on Instagram with a message that said, "The old man lost his long battle with Parkinson's this morning. Love you." The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop also said in a statement that Harrison had been surrounded by loving family in his last days. The response was immediate. Fans flooded social media with tributes, sharing their favorite moments from Pawn Stars and remembering the man who had entertained them for almost a decade. Harrison's famous chair at the shop became a makeshift memorial with people leaving flowers, notes, and small mementos. Harrison had an undeniable effect on people. He wasn't just a character, his family was heartbroken, but they found comfort in the outpouring of love from fans. Rick posted several tributes, calling his father my hero and thanking everyone for their support. Corey Harrison, who had worked with his grandfather for over 15 years, talked about how much he had learned from him. To Corey, he wasn't just a grandfather, he was a mentor and best friend. Austin Chumley Russell also shared his memories, remembering how Harrison was funny and tough at the same time. In 2018, the History Channel honored Harrison with a special episode called A Treasure Remembered, which showed some of his most memorable moments from the show's more than 500 episodes. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had shaped the show from the start, as fans saw his best one-liners and toughest negotiations play out one last time, reminding them of the wit and wisdom that had made him a legend. Richard Harrison's death in 2018 was not just a personal loss for his family and friends, it showed deep cracks in the family that had been building up for years. What appeared to be a successful family business on TV was actually a mess of arguments that would later turn into lawsuits, accusations, and nasty fights over money and power. Things took a dramatic turn in February 2022 when Joanne Harrison Richards' widow sued her own son Rick Harrison, saying that Rick had tricked her into giving up most of her shares in the gold and silver pawn shop while she was away. According to Joanne, she didn't know what she was agreeing to when she signed the papers. When she finally understood what had happened after a heated argument with Rick, it was too late. The lawsuit revealed something even more shocking. When Richard died, Joanne inherited his 49% share of the business, making her the full owner of the shop. But she said Rick wouldn't give her the financial records or stop sending her money every month for living costs. At first he used to give her $25,000 a month, but then he cut it down to $20,000 and stopped giving her money altogether in 2020. Joanne also accused Rick of keeping over $500,000 in cash and silver that Richard had saved before he died. Rick denied all of these claims and said that his mother wasn't acting on her own but was being manipulated by people who wanted to take advantage of the situation. The legal battle didn't end there. In March 2022, Joanne asked for a temporary restraining order, which made the situation even worse. Fans were shocked by the fight because they had always seen the Harrison family as a united front. For years, Pawn Stars was one of the most popular reality shows on TV, and the Harrison family was at the center of it. But this lawsuit made it clear that things were far from perfect behind the scenes. This wasn't the first time the family had been involved in a lawsuit. In May 2012, a disabled Vietnam veteran named Daniel Callahan sued Richard and Rick Harrison, saying they beat him up at the gold and silver pawn shop in late 2011 during a fight over a rifle he brought in for appraisal. Callahan said he had brought a Model 96B rifle to the shop hoping to get a fair deal, but things got worse quickly, according to his lawsuit. Richard and Rick allegedly choked him and dragged him out of the store, where they threw him to the sidewalk with his rifle and cane. He said his things were stolen, he was hurt and needed medical care, and he was suing for $220,000 to cover his medical bills and legal fees. The lawsuit painted a disturbing picture of what had happened that day, but Corey Harrison, also known as Big Hoss, stepped in to defend his family. He said the accusations were completely false, and that neither Rick nor Richard were even in the store at the time of the incident. According to Corey Callahan, Harrison started acting aggressively while still holding the leather case file. Out of respect for everyone's safety, security had to take his rifle out of the store. The case brought unwanted attention to Pawn Stars at a time when the show was more popular than ever. Fans had mixed feelings about it. Some believed Harrison and said that the lawsuit was just an attempt to get money from a successful business. Others questioned how the situation was handled and wondered if the pawn shop had the right security measures in place. Either way, the controversy hurt the show's reputation, but lawsuits were only the beginning. Pawn Stars had a lot of drama, and there were serious problems going on behind the scenes that most people never saw. The main cast seemed to get along well on screen, but there were growing disagreements over money and credit. Some cast members thought Rick Harrison was getting all the credit and most of the screen time, even though others had done just as much to make the shop successful. It wasn't just the cast who was upset. The crew and scriptwriters concerns were raised about unfair treatment, as many reality TV writers were paid much less than those who worked on scripted TV shows. For example, a survey by the Writers Guild of America East found that Pawn Stars writers were making about $2,136 per week, while writers on scripted TV shows could make up to $671 per week for similar work. Wage disputes weren't the only problem. As the show became more popular, fans started to wonder how real everything was. People watched Pawn Stars because they thought it was a real look at what goes on in a real pawn shop, but later reports came out saying that many of the deals seen on the show were staged. Buyers and sellers were often picked out ahead of time, and negotiations were sometimes planned ahead of time to make the episodes more entertaining. This kind of thing happens a lot in reality TV, but it made some viewers feel like they had been lied to for years. Pawn Stars built its reputation on the idea that it was an unscripted look at a family business, but as more of these stories came to light, the show's carefully created image started to break.